Hi, welcome to What Does Your Genetics or SNP Say About Your Health? My name is Barbara Solomon. I'm a board-certified nutrition specialist and certified functional medicine practitioner. Before we get started, I need to come over this disclaimer. First of all, I'm not a medical doctor, and the following information is not intended to be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any illness. That's what your doctor is for. So this should not be considered medical advice, and if you have an issue with your health, please see your doctor. Okay, let's get started. First of all, I have to start off by saying that genes are extremely cool. And what genes are, they are a segment of your DNA. Our DNA is our own personal genetic blueprint. That's what makes each of us unique. Now, we have about 19,000 different genes in our body, and their particular job is to code for proteins so that we can do all the things that we need to do. Now, a lot of these genes are redundant so that in case there's an error, we can still make the proteins and still do all the things that our body is designed to do. So what do these proteins do? I can't even begin to tell you how important they are. They make up your organs and your muscles and your blood and your bones and your neurotransmitters and messengers and immune system. And we can also use these proteins as an alternate source of energy when we run low on blood sugar. So to get started, we need to look at our DNA. And again, our DNA contains genetic information for our body. And it really is a spiral staircase made up of nucleotides passed down from each of your parents. And if you look over here on the right, this would be the spiral staircase that I'm talking about. Now, let's break this down even further. If we look over here on the left, and we kind of look at this as a ladder. We kind of open up that spiral staircase and kind of flatten it out. We can see that the side rails here, the things you would hold on to if you were walking up the ladder, they're made up of sugar and phosphates, and that's this backbone right here. And then the rungs are made up of things called nucleic acids. And so these would be the things that you would actually step on. So the combination of the side rails and the rung would be considered a nucleotide. And again, these nucleotides are bound together. So you'd have a little hydrogen bond right here that would bound these together, and then you twist them together and you'd make up your DNA. So you may have heard of something called a SNP. And what a SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism, and it represents an error in the manufacture of these particular genes. So the one on the left is called MTHFR, and that's a gene, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, that's really important part of the methylation process. If you notice, this is our ladder again, so we have our side rails and we have our rungs, and each of these rungs has a number, and that's its position within the DNA. So let's look at the difference between these two. You can see on rung 677, there should be a nucleic acid that's a C. And if we look over to the right, 677 instead has been replaced with something called a T. And that's where the error occurs. So the way this would be read is this is an MTHFR gene that has a SNP or a polymorphism that has replaced a C with a T at position 677. Now, when this particular thing happens, this actually changes the form and the function of this particular gene. And what we're finding is a lot of people are really reporting polymorphisms with this particular gene. It depends on how many errors that have occurred. There could be one error that you replace the C with a T, and that may change the ability of this gene to work by 20, 30, something like that %. But what if instead there's errors on both sides? That may actually change it significantly, where maybe it doesn't work like 80% of the time. So each individual is different, and how this affects their physiology is much different as well. Now, let's look at an example of how this thing is happening and how these SNPs are changing our genes. We just kind of mentioned it, but let's look at it in picture form. So here on the left, we have our normal gene, and then we have our SNP occurring. And as you can see, this particular gene has decided to code for an enzyme, a protein that's an enzyme. So it has its normal shape and its normal function. When we have this polymorphism, this actually can alter the shape of the gene, and that alters the function. Now, just because this is altered doesn't mean it doesn't work. Sometimes it upregulates the genes and causes them to move to work harder. Sometimes it downregulates the genes that causes them to work less. Sometimes, depending on the genes involved, it cancels each other out. And sometimes the genes are really important when you're first born for like a survival of the fittest advantage, but as you age, then these SNPs become a disadvantage. So it really is based on the individual and how these single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNPs actually affect your health. That being said, it's kind of important, I think, to determine what your blueprint is. And I often ask my clients to have their DNA tested so that way we can decide, okay, how can we best support you if indeed we do find a problem with your health or there is some dysfunction occurring in physiology. So the way you can do this is there's a few companies out there. There's 23andMe and there's Ancestry.com, and it's a saliva test. You go ahead and you submit that sample, they strand out your DNA, and both of those tests give you your ancestry data. But in addition, you can go ahead and request the download of the raw data, and then the raw data contains all this health information, all of these genes here and their potential polymorphisms or their potential SNPs. So if you have a gene, let's look in this case, it's MAO. This is a gene that's involved in neurotransmitters. And in this particular case, it's green and they didn't find any polymorphisms or any SNPs at all. But the gene above it called GIF, which is responsible for things in the body, this has one polymorphism that's occurred, so it's yellow. And say there was an error where there was two, it would be denoted here by red. Now, I really like this because you can kind of get an idea what your blueprint is, and then we can use blood and other kinds of advanced testing to see if this is actually affecting your health. And actually, I do it the other way around. I look at blood first and then go, hey, why is this maybe occurring? Could there be some genetic thing that we need to look at? Now, there's something that's happened in the last couple weeks or so, and this was recorded in August of 2017, where the 23andMe has moved their chipset. They used to be a version 4 to version 5, and now a lot of these genes, these SNPs they used to report, are no longer showing up. And so a lot of the third-party transcription companies that take this raw data and put it in this form for us so that we're able to read are unable to do so. So hopefully soon that will be fixed. But if you're looking at this in August of 2017, this might be an issue. MTHRsupport.com does support ancestry data, and they haven't changed the use of their SNPs, but 23andMe has. So I just want to kind of point that out. So what does all this data really tell us? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this example. And this is the pathway that takes folates and folic acid. So folates would be coming from uncooked leafy greens and folic acid from supplementation, and how it converts that into methylated folates. And so the idea is that there's a lot of enzymic reactions involved. So when we look at our genetic data, say your doctor is going, you know, you seem to have a problem with methylation, and where might that be occurring? Now that could be occurring because there's all these enzymes that are involved, and there could be some SNPs involved, and you can see in these cases, no SNPs, no problem at all. But when it comes down here to the final conversion, there's a SNP, there's a polymorphism, and that may be creating the problem of why you're having an issue with methylation. Now, that in itself doesn't tell us everything that we need to know. The cool thing about this is these genes, these enzymes, can be modified based on the environment. So in this particular case, say it's going too slowly. What the things that might be blocking it are things such as methylation and folic acid, because folic acid will actually block the usage of our folates. There could be reaction oxygen species, other different factors that might be slowing this down. Say we wanted to speed this up. Maybe we could use a little DHA. We can go ahead and do some methionine work, some alpha lipoic acid. So it gives us a lot of information. We know, hey, there's a problem. Something might be occurring here, but we don't rely 100% on that. We look at the things that might be changing the way that it works, and then we can also look, knowing that how these pathways work, depending on the gene involved or the enzyme in this case involved, we can look at the various cofactors and if those are present. So maybe it has nothing to do with the genes at all. Maybe the fact that you're missing some kind of niacin, maybe you're missing some very important B vitamins, something like that. So that's why it's really not all about the genes and not all about the SNPs, and how you have to take a big picture approach to this thing. So here are some of the genes that we focus on, and really we're still in the infancy of genetics. It's really become affordable in maybe like the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be very, very expensive. You used to only get a few genes. Now they're reporting so many genes, thousands of genes, a lot of them that we really still don't know what to do with or how to slow up or speed down or whatever the case may be. But we're really kind of looking at genes for gut. You know, we want to look at nutrients and detoxification and energies and obviously the folate pathways, neurotransmitters and brains. So there's a lot of things we can look at. And so here's an example of what the kinds of things that I look at when we talk about looking at genes for gut. So we can see maybe if there's potential for celiac disease, or there might be issues with oxalates that could be potentially causing gut inflammation or blocking the absorption of certain minerals. Is your gut sensitive to particular things? Do you have maybe a problem with peanut sensitivity or lactose intolerance? Maybe you have a problem with histamines that could create leaky gut, or maybe a problem with fats or utilizing some of your fat-soluble vitamins. So these are just some of the things that we can look at to kind of get an idea that if we are seeing problems with health, dysfunctions with health, maybe there could possibly be some genetic basis for those. So, we talk about MTHFR, and I want to just focus in on that because that seems to be the gene that everybody's talking about, and that's the one that's denoted in blue right here. But this is this methylation cycle that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and this idea of looking at one gene in isolation, really not telling us the whole picture. The way that this methylation cycle works, the whole idea is we want to create methylation because it's responsible for helping us create proteins and lipids in our DNA and our RNA, and this is really super important stuff. Now, there's lots of things that could affect MTHFR. There could be genes here like MTRR and MTR that affect the usage of B12 that could be affecting the ability to methylate. There could be issues with CBS that could be affecting the ability to methylate. So it's not just this particular genes, but all of these, or enzymes in this case, but how they work together. Now, methylation is really important because it's responsible for brain function. It's responsible for infections and neurotransmitters and removing toxins. So it plays a lot of roles in there. So, we have to think about the fact that there's lots of things that could affect it. There could be things like toxins, infections, and anemias or antioxidant deficiencies that in itself could be affecting this gene, because if these kinds of things happen, we really kind of utilize a lot of the resources that we'd use to create glutathione to help those particular things rather than giving the resources maybe to make MTHFR. So it's really important, again, to not just look at one gene in isolation, but look at how they all play together. So if we have these SNPs or these polymorphisms, is there absolutely nothing that we can do about it? Are they just passed down by our parents and then that's the hand that we're dealt with? Well, it turns out that about 70% of our genetics can be modified with lifestyle and environmental changes. And that is a great plus for us because that means the errors that were passed down by our parents, we can kind of fix on our own so that way we don't pass them down to our own offspring. And I love this little cartoon. The high carb diet I put you on 20 years ago gave you diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Oops. And that's what we're finding out, that things are inducible. Things can change based on your environment. So here's an example. There are things that can enhance your genetic expression and there's things that can detract from it. We do know that our genes really don't change, but we can change the influence that they have on our health. For instance, things such as diet and psychological state and your interactions and your microbiome, that's really, really important. Your ability to exercise, those type of things can really enhance your genetic expression. Now, things such as diseases and chemicals and stressors and all of those things can actually influence your genetic expression towards dysfunction rather than towards health. So the idea is that despite that we can't change our genes, the way that we interact with our environment change the way that they are expressed. Now, here's the big kick. Just because you have a SNP doesn't mean you have a disease. And I really wanted to point that out because so many people out there right now are getting their genetic testing done, and then I get these calls, hey, I have MTHFR. What do I do about it? What supplement do I take? Now, we are not concerned about the SNPs itself. We are concerned on whether SNPs are affecting your health. So please, please, please don't take supplements based solely on your genetics. Even if you have a problem with MTHFR and it is just a slight dysfunction, say you're under a big amount of stress, you during that time may need more methylated folates than if you were in your normal state. And if you just rely on genetics alone without any other influence, without any other testing, you may not be supporting your body in the best manner that you could be. The other thing is that, these SNPs again were reported they're in isolation. And again, we showed you earlier, gene-to-gene interaction is really, really important because they can cancel each other out, they can enhance each other. It's really important to get a full picture. And a lot of the reports come back with clinically irrelevant SNPs. There's a lot of MTHFR SNPs out there, but the ones that we look at are 677 and 1298. And the other ones, we just don't know how clinically relevant they are at this time. And if you're going to support based on that, you may end up doing more harm than good or good than harm, but we just won't know. Now, if you have health issues, you have symptoms, you have concerns, you need to go to your practitioner, you need to go to your doctor, and you need to test. Yes, you can bring them your SNPs because that will help them. Say you have a disease that requires a drug. They can actually look at your SNPs, your detoxification SNPs, and decide, hey, this drug is a good choice because you don't have any SNPs and therefore you'll be able to utilize and detoxify this drug very well. Or maybe they'll look at your SNPs and go, whoa, wait a minute, I was going to give you this particular drug, but I could see you have a SNP in this particular detoxification pathway, and maybe just to cover our bases, we'll give you a different drug instead. So it's really all about testing. The SNPs are used for information only, but they shouldn't be what your health is decided on their sole basis, okay? So again, I just want to clarify, if you are having any health issues, it is important that you do not rely on genetics alone. You really need to go to your doctor, have biomedical testing done, whether that's blood or urine or stool or whatever it is that your doctor recommends. And then at that point, you can decide with your practicing physician if you need to go and have your genetic SNPs done or what other testing that you need done. But please, again, don't just rely on the genetic testing. Really look at the test data and then apply the genetic testing if you have it to give yourself an overall health picture. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to find out more about functional medicine or clinical nutrition or what we do, we're at functionalhealthforyou.com. We have just released our new book called Eliminating the Pain of the Elimination Diet that talks about diet, it talks about roadblocks to health, it talks about neurotransmitters and their effect on the ability to make change, all kinds of good information. So again, thank you so much for your time. Good night.